What other skills do you want to be able to do in algebra? Well, you want to be able to do everything that you could do in primary school with numbers. So we probably want to look at adding fractions. And if you just go back to a basic example from primary school, we still follow the method that I'm going to follow here. Now, there's a few different ways of looking at it. I might make a different video to show you a different method. But if you think about it, you can't add a half and a third. Like a half, you're going to have to break up into, let's say, 3/6, and this you're going to have to break up into 2/6. But the way that we look at that is you need to get maybe a common denominator. So you need to pick the lowest common denominator, and I'll show you why you need to pick the lowest common denominator in a minute. Or at least, not that you need to, but that you will give yourself extra work if you don't pick the lowest common denominator. So the lowest common denominator there is 6. So in order to make the bottom line a 6 here, I'm going to multiply it by 3. But you're not just allowed to change things in maths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the top also by 3. Because what is 3 over 3? 3 over 3 simplifies to the number 1. Multiplying anything by the number 1 doesn't change it. 100 by the number 1 doesn't change it. 1,000 multiplied by the number 1 doesn't change it. So I'm strategically multiplying by the number 1 so that I get a 6 on the bottom there. And here, in order to get a 6 on the bottom, I'm going to multiply by a 2. But in order to make sure that I'm multiplying by the number 1, I need to multiply by 2 over 2. So that changes this to 3 times 1 is 3. And that changes here, plus 2 times 1 is 2. And the bottom here is 6, and the bottom here is 6. So when you think about it, as we said, like this is 3/6, and this is 2/6. So altogether I have 5/6. So I'm just going to write it down straight away that, I know I'm working in sixths. So I get 5/6. What would happen if I hadn't picked the lowest common denominator? So let's say I had a half plus a third, and I decided to maybe make 12 the common denominator. So I'm going to multiply the bottom by a 6, but I need to multiply the top by a 6 because I need to multiply by the number 1. Otherwise, I'm changing the question. I don't want to change it. And here, I'm going to multiply the bottom by a 4, so I need to multiply the top by a 4. So I'm working in 12ths this time. So that's 6/12 plus 4/12 gives me 10/12. You are not, for your leaving cert, allowed give a fraction as an answer unless it's in its simplest terms. So now you'll have to factorize the top, factorize the bottom, and simplify. You don't want to have to do that extra work. Not in algebra anyway. It's easy now probably with your numbers, but not in algebra. So if we look at maybe just a straightforward example of x over 4 plus 2x over 2. Common denominator we're going to say is 4. So this one I actually am just multiplying by 1 over 1. And this side I'm going to multiply by a 2 over 2. Which gives me, now my base is fourths, like it's quarters. So that gives me 1x there plus 4x gives me 5x over 4. So that's my question, my two fractions in one single fraction. If we want to make it a bit trickier, you could have 5x plus 1 over 3 minus this time. Let's go for minus. And 5 on the bottom there, and x maybe minus 1 on the top. So I'm going for 15ths this time, my lowest common denominator. And in order to make this 15, I need to multiply above and below by 5. Now remember, you're multiplying the whole thing by 5. So that gives me 25x plus a 5. And here, be really careful, you need to multiply this by a 3 on the bottom. Now I'm putting it in front on purpose because be careful that minus needs to be taken into account. So that's minus 3x plus 3, and then I clean that up to give you 15, that is 22x plus 8 all over 15. If you want to make it a bit trickier again, you could have, let's say, a 4 over x plus 1 plus maybe a 1 all over an x. Common denominator this time looks to be this times this. Remember, if we go back up here, the common denominator, so the original question was a half plus a third. Common denominator you often, not all the time, you often get by just multiplying your two bottom numbers. Now, not all the time. If you multiply all the time, you might end up, you know, with something that you will have to simplify. So do think about it before you do it, so that way you hopefully don't have to simplify. So common denominator is that. How do I make the bottom of my fraction look like this? I mean, that's what I was doing. How do I make the bottom of my fraction look like my common denominator? In this situation, I need to multiply this by an x. But if I multiply the bottom by an x, I have to multiply the top by an x, because if you simplify that fraction, you're multiplying by the number 1. How about over here? Well, I need to multiply it by an x plus 1. But again, I need to multiply the top by an x plus 1 then. So my common denominator I have, so it's just my top line I need to work out. 4x plus 1x plus 1 gives me 5x plus 1 all over, and if you want to, you can multiply that out or leave it as it is, depending on the question. But I normally would just multiply it out because it's pretty quick to multiply out. So I had two fractions. I did some, sorry, down here. I had two fractions. I did some work to get them into one single fraction. So I started with two fractions, this plus this, and I had to do some work and get them into one single fraction. So same method as primary school. That's why it's beneficial probably to, you know, look at your primary school methods. Maybe if you get a really complicated one and you're not sure what to do, well, then just look at, like, do a primary school one, look at the method and see if you can just replicate it in a more awkward situation.